Did you know that they had a science fiction convention before the light bulb was invented? Winged telepathic superhuman enthusiast Professor Jelly here, and today we dive into the Vril, Bazaar and Fete page on this episode of Weird Wikipedia. This story begins with a man called Herbert Tibbets who, despite his name, was actually not an anthropomorphic rabbit who lived in a turnip in the English countryside. He was actually the founder of the London Massage and Galvanic Hospital, and as the founder, one of his main duties was finding ways to fundraise so that the hospital could, continue to galvanate people, presumably. And one of the main ways that he did this was by organizing large social events where he would invite well-to-do people to sit on the committee to host them. And he was pretty good at it, as in 1890 he had created a nice carnival bazaar that brought in 4,000 quid for the hospital, which is over 600,000 pounds in today's money. Well, for the 1891 fundraiser, Herbert thought that he would be doing things a little different this year. We would not be getting a black tie ball, or a play, or a concert, or even a toilet seat horseshoes tournament. No, we would be getting an experimental convention based off of a supernatural themed novel that was incredibly popular with the occult. This is the plan. For some reason, the Vril page does not link to the actual book, but there is a page, and it is very interesting. The Coming Race, also called Vril, was a novel that was written by that guy, but published anonymously. Ed also happens to be the gentleman who coined the phrase, "the pen is mightier than the sword," which you obviously already knew. The plot of the novel is this. An unnamed narrator stumbles upon a massive technologically advanced civilization that exists in the center of the earth. The inhabitants have magical powers that come from this ever-present fluid called Vril, which acts a lot like electricity and can do wonderful things. The narrator starts to integrate with the society, and eventually him and the Princess Z fall in love, blah 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 blah. They return to the surface, hooray. So this book became quite popular in the following years. It was actually so popular that the term Vril entered into the popular vernacular. And the term Vril was the inspiration for the name of Bovril, which from my understanding is some type of beef-based Vegemite type substance that occasionally got the Pope to advertise for them. And while many people point out that this book had an influence on later science fiction writers, it definitely had an impact on the occult. As you know, if you've ever watched any scary movie ever, this late 1800s time was the golden age of spooky, scary occult fascination among Victorian society. And this idea of a mythical, all-powerful elixir was a really good fit for the period. So this idea of Vril spread throughout the greater occult community, and people would form Vril societies, where they got together to look for Vril, which is once again not a real thing and came from a book, but people still look for it. And in particular, some of the later fans of this concept were the Nazis. The relationship between the Nazis and the occult is well documented, and one of these things that they really kind of fell in love with was this idea of Vril and finding this secret power source. And this fake juice started showing up everywhere in relation to these supposed planned UFOs and other such things that you would see late at night on History Channel. And just to bring things back to the story, Herb thought that this was the thing that was going to have the rich socialites eating it with the palm of his hand. Now, to his credit, the Nazis weren't around yet, so that wasn't part of the equation, but it's just weird that this was ever something that well-to-do people would be into. And I guess that he was right, because high society people did sign up to host this event. Victorian age just hit different, I guess. And to his credit, Herbert gave it his best shot. In the novel, the architecture of the underground Vril city is described as resembling the architecture of ancient Egypt. So he rented Royal Albert Hall and then had it decorated with Egyptian motifs and erected a Cleopatra's Needle knockoff. Among all these decorations would be flying mannequins representing the Vril, magic shows, a fortune-telling dog, booths selling handcrafted goods, and people in costume. So essentially like a normal con, except for maybe more fortune-telling dogs. It's also interesting that there were stands selling Bovril, the brand whose name was directly inspired from the book. But they weren't putting it on toast, they were just selling it as a broth drink. Which goes against, every impulse that I have, as a human, but supposedly this is something that people actually do, drink hot beef blood broth. Also, intermingling in the crowd was a young woman dressed as the heroine of the novel, Princess Z, who had a silver flower tiara that glowed with electric lights, and many things were described with the invented language of the novel, with dictionaries distributed to the guests so they were able to decipher the comments. As an example, you can tell your friends that "kum posh" means insincerity in the Vril language. Guys, my life is falling apart. And believe it or not, the reception was actually pretty good, with the first day being opened by the youngest child of Queen Victoria. And I guess that people just could not get enough of Vril, because while the event was only originally scheduled for 3 days, it was actually extended to 5 to meet the popular demand. And while popular, it was not particularly well received critically, with several newspapers deriding the event for being poorly produced, especially when several mechanical problems popped up with the flying mannequins, which stopped them from flying, with one reviewer in the Leeds Times saying it was a very sorry affair, inartistic, stupid, and a vulgar entertainment in the name of charity. It was a bit like the occult version of Nickelback, hated critically, yet still somehow popular. But unlike Nickelback, this didn't make any money. See, Herbert had personally covered all of the cost of the festival out of his own pocket, and even with the extended runtime, the event simply did not make enough money to cover the massive cost of bringing a fictional world like this on such a grand scale. And so, the event bankrupted Herb. In the bankruptcy proceedings, it came out that several bags of supposed proceeds had been topped off with money borrowed from the stall keepers. And when it was all said and done, Herb was broke, and the total donations to the hospital only ended up being a measly 21 pounds. And while the event was certainly not a success in what it was originally designed to do, make the hospital money, it did set forward several ideas and concepts that are still felt today, such as specialized conventions designed around specific media franchises and people dressing up as their favorite characters. But I really do feel like that the most impressive thing out of this whole event was just how early this happened. Like, we barely had the car and we're having a sci-fi convention. Such is life. Boy oh boy, were the 1800s a crazy time. Something crazy that was also going on at the same time was the several unidentified Major League Baseball players that we have no idea what their first name is, of which I made a video about, which you can watch right here.